5 Live Formula One.
Welcome to a bustling paddock here at the Albert Park circuit, and we have just witnessed the Australian Grand Prix, and it was a little bit hectic. I wouldn't go as far as to say it was chaotic as 2023, but it's given us plenty to talk about on the Chequered Flag podcast. It's Rosanna Tennant with you in the paddock, joined by our lead commentator Harry Benjamin and a former mechanic at McLaren F1, Mark Priestley. Guys, there was a lot of expectation going into the Australian Grand Prix this year. Did it live up to it for you, Harry?
Absolutely, it did. That was a really intriguing race. It was a battle of strategy. We got some good overtakes. There was some collisions as well, and Max Verstappen and Red Bull with a reliability issue, seemingly, and not being completely bulletproof. But at the same time, Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari still had the pace either way to be there or thereabouts. So it was a really good race. I hope for everybody listening, it was worth the early start in the UK. I think it was.
I think it was. Let's tell you who finished where then. It was Carlos Sainz on the top step of the podium, and it was a 1-2 for Ferrari. Charles Leclerc finishing P2 and Lando Norris coming home P3 for McLaren. That was your old team, Mark Priestley. What a race. Did you enjoy it as well?
Absolutely loved it. And it wasn't just because, we were minus Max Verstappen for most of that race. I think despite Max Verstappen's departure early on with that failure of his car, I think there was lots going on. Up and down the field, there was lots going on. There was some close racing, different strategies that only really came together and played out, and we saw the results towards the end. As Harry said, incidents. We ended the race with George Russell sitting on his side in the Mercedes. So there was all sorts going on. So yeah, plenty to keep us hooked and on the edge of our seats.
And plenty to talk about. So let's start with Carlos Sainz, our race winner, the only other race winner apart from Max Verstappen in the last 21 Grand Prix. The stats are quite frankly staggering, Harry.
Yeah, so impressive in what will be his final season for Ferrari before he makes way for the 7-time champion Lewis Hamilton. We've spoken so much about his bounce back from that appendix surgery, which is no mean feat. Getting into these cars and getting back up to pace and feeling the G-forces. He wasn't on it straight away from the start of the weekend. It was about half a second off in practice and really was bedding himself in, and then qualifying he just was getting better and better and was quicker than his teammate Leclerc, which isn't always the case. But you know what, to me this is going to be a talking point for a long time. Carlos Sainz is probably now, if he wasn't before, one of the most underrated drivers in the field. He, throughout his Formula One career, has had consistently great teammates, and he has shown up against all of them very, very well. He doesn't always come out on top every time, but it's very tight, it's very close. When he came into Formula One alongside Max Verstappen, being the only other driver at the moment to win a race not in a Red Bull car, but going up against Lando Norris in a McLaren, and every time he's always been impressive, and it is beyond words how underrated he is right now. I'm really excited to see what this does for his future and where he will go next year.
The fact that he was on an operating table a couple of weeks ago, having his appendix removed, then being strapped into a Formula One car. Mark, you'll have been there, strapping drivers into cars in the past. This is no mean feat.
On an operating table.
No. Yeah,
we've all got our appendix in.
We're a fully appendixed team. You know what it's like to strap a driver into a car. That's pretty tight. To then experience the G-forces out on a track like the Albert Park circuit, what he's done over the last few days, it's heroic, isn't it? It's heroic.
Yeah, it genuinely is, and not just handling all of that, because this is a tough circuit anyway. These modern generation of Formula One cars really stiff, so you feel every lump and bump, and this is a bumpy street-type circuit. You touch the curbs and you feel it through your bones. So all of that is enough to deal with. But actually, from a mental perspective, his mindset has been, even the day after surgery, he was back at the racetrack, wasn't he, in Saudi Arabia, helping the team through things like debriefs, listening in and contributing wherever he could. So I think the way he portrays himself, the way he handles himself, is just as good as the way he's driving this car, and that will put him in really great stead, stand him in great stead for other teams looking on, which they will all be doing now. Mercedes is a really big one, of course. They've got a seat opening up. Not sure he's going to want to go from this blisteringly fast red car into a Mercedes that's really struggling, but lots of teams will be looking at him as a hot ticket, and rightly so.
Let's hear from Carlos Sainz then, your race winner down under. Carlos, don't call it a comeback. Well done, congratulations.
Thank you.
Just tell me how your body is feeling right now.
A bit stiff, I'm not gonna lie, but with the adrenaline, I was okay. Last 10 laps, a bit tired, a bit stiff on the lower back and stuff from not training and spending too much time in bed. But with adrenaline and when you're leading, everything changes, and I could get it done.
What a moment for the team. We have to whisper, obviously, that Red Bull weren't in it today. So what do you guys need to do to make sure you're there always on merit for the rest of the season?
I mean, Red Bull were in it at the beginning, and we could still keep up on that lap one and put Max under pressure. That is something that we haven't been able to do in other circuits. So definitely this layout did well to our car. And then I think, honestly, today we had pace. Even if Max would have been there, I'm pretty confident we could have put on a good fight, because if you look at the long runs from Friday, we were up there. So an extremely good job from the team, and a 1-2 that tastes like glory for us.
So that was Carlos Sainz. Very, very impressive stuff from the Spanish driver, and impressive from Ferrari as well this weekend. A 1-2 for them. Carlos bringing home the silverware, but also his teammate Charles Leclerc on the second step of the podium. Charles Leclerc, I have to say, the word here was that he was going to take pole position. He didn't. And they also thought he'd be a threat in the race. And he wasn't really. Okay, finishing P2, but with Max Verstappen out of the picture, were you hoping for a bit more from the Monegasque driver?
I think we were expecting a little bit more over the course, particularly when you're comparing Sainz and Leclerc. Leclerc does tend to come out on top more times than not in terms of having that little bit of extra speed there. But I think Leclerc was more concerned, especially towards the end of that race, about making sure he stayed ahead of Lando Norris in the chasing McLaren, and just trying to manage the tyres and eke out the gap and try and stabilise it, because Norris was closing in on Leclerc towards the end of that race. But I think he was saying himself, he just didn't have the speed compared to Sainz, even in qualifying.
Yeah, and do you know what's really interesting when you look back over this whole weekend? I don't think anybody in terms of teams have been really consistent from the start of the weekend right through, and it's perhaps partly to do with the nature of this circuit. It's slightly odd in terms of it's a bit of a street circuit running through a park. It's lumpy and bumpy, but it's also sort of front limited, so the front tyres are your sort of your kind of weak point when it comes to pushing them and running out of performance. And I think it's a slight anomaly. So yeah, Carlos wasn't necessarily the fastest in the early part of the weekend in that red team. It was Charles Leclerc, but when it came to qualifying, and certainly in today's race, it was more on the side of Carlos Sainz. So it's been swinging backwards and forwards, both inside teams and up and down the grid, and that's made for a really fascinating weekend, I think. It hasn't been one team consistently fastest and dominating all the way through, not even one driver within a team. It's been great.
Yeah, lots of variables to keep an eye on. And one thing that has, I guess, shocked a lot of people, it would be not seeing Max Verstappen on the top step of the podium, not seeing him take the checkered flag. Max Verstappen ending his race prematurely with his brakes catching fire, the right rear, causing all sorts of problems, having to slowly make his way back to the pits, and then DNFing. Not what we're expecting from the three-time world champion, Harry.
No, not at all. We've spoken about it time and time again. Verstappen in particular just never seems to get affected by any kind of reliability issues over the last couple of years, or even when track conditions change or weather, he always seems to come out on top, and in this case he didn't. And already in terms of pace, it was a bit tighter than normal. It wasn't the usual Verstappen domination from the get-go. It's been a scrappy weekend for everybody involved in Formula One across this Albert Park circuit, but it was a surprise, and especially it was a major issue because as he came into the pit lane, it literally exploded as he was approaching the pit limiter, and clearly an issue and an Achilles heel for Verstappen and Red Bull that they were a bit unaware of.
Yeah, brakes get very hot, but they can manage hot temperatures. They have a certain window of temperature that they need to be hot, in fact, these carbon fibre brakes to work. But you go over that by a few hundred degrees, which is what will have happened here, because it sounds like the brake caliper seized on, so the pads constantly clamping on the disc all the way through, almost as if you've left your handbrake on in your road car. Doesn't take very long for that to start getting very hot, smouldering, and then catching fire. And as soon as that happens, the temperatures go through the roof. I think the explosion on the way into the pit lane was probably the tyre letting go, the pressure suddenly releasing out of that tyre. But yeah, to see him disappear out of this race so early with a technical failure is really unusual. But as Harry said, it was an unusual weekend, and what that gave was opportunity to everybody else up and down the grid. Everyone suddenly saw, even way down towards the back, people saw the opportunity of points happening. So it's opened up, what made a great Sunday, a great race, not just because Max Verstappen was out of it, as I said earlier. This was a great race anyway, and there was close racing. But I think this shows that there is a vulnerability to Red Bull Racing that we all thought there kind of wasn't. We thought they were invincible. Well, they're not. First
retirement for Max in 2 years.
Yeah.
At this track it last came.
But what it does really highlight is the fact that if you're Red Bull and you haven't got Max Verstappen, what have you got? Because Sergio wasn't there in second place, which is where they really needed to be. So this has highlighted an even bigger problem perhaps for Red Bull Racing.
Yeah, one-man team. I tell you what, it has opened up the Constructors' Championship, though, for other teams further down the grid who've managed to score points. We'll come on to them a little later on in the podcast. But first, let's listen to what Max Verstappen had to say once he'd gathered his thoughts after a premature finish to the Australian Grand Prix.
Hey, Max, just can you tell us what happened out there and when did you first realise you had a problem?
Well, in the car, from my side, already when I had that moment in turn 3, it was very weird why that happened, because you weren't really pushing, you're just easing into the race, settling in. But of course, once I got out of the car, you look into the data, and basically what happened was from the when the lights went off, the right rear brake stuck on, and it didn't cool, so it just kept on being warmer and warmer, giving me really weird instabilities, and then of course it caught fire.
How frustrating is it to kind of get your first retirement, I think, in 2 years, basically to this race?
Yeah, it's not ideal. Of course, you always want to finish the races, but it's a mechanical sport. These things unfortunately happen, but I think it's most important, of course, that we understand why it happened.
That was Max Verstappen talking to Lawrence Barretto. Max Verstappen unable to complete 58 laps here of the Australian Grand Prix. Despite starting on pole position, it all came undone for the Dutchman. And his teammate Sergio Perez unable to capitalise on a race where his teammate wasn't there. And what does that mean? What does this mean for Red Bull and Sergio Perez and his future with the team?
Really disappointing from Perez. His job in that team is to be number 2 driver and to be there to take the win when Max Verstappen is unable to. So far, we haven't really had the need for that role to be filled. Today is when he should have been there. But you know what? Even if he had started third, where he had initially qualified, he was given a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Nico Hülkenberg in qualifying. But even if he had started in third, the pace compared to Ferrari on Perez's side wasn't enough.
Nowhere near enough, was it? I mean, I think if you look at Max Verstappen's side of the garage, he struggled to some extent over the weekend. We saw him complaining and moaning and really struggling to get balance in that car. But when it came to it on Saturday in qualifying, he did it. He put together an unbelievable lap that secured pole position. So Perez has also struggled. So you can say the team haven't been really comfortable. The team have found a circuit that doesn't quite suit their car, and they've had to really work for it this weekend. But on Perez's side, they just haven't managed to get anywhere near the performance that Max finally delivered when it mattered in qualifying. Sergio is still way off. And even if you take his qualifying lap as being a sort of half-decent lap, I think he qualified a few places behind Max, never quite on the same level. But in the race, it was miles away, wasn't it?
Today's race, I think, unfortunately confirmed that Perez isn't the right man to be in that number 2 seat at Red Bull. That is overarchingly what this shows. If something like this happens again, where not only is Verstappen out of the race, but it's tighter than normal between the top teams, Red Bull and Ferrari, even if Perez started in third, he would have been overtaken by Leclerc. He would have fallen back through the field, and that's the bigger issue here.
They've got the luxury, haven't they? They've created the luxury of being so dominant at most tracks in terms of overall points in the championship, and over the last couple of years even, the luxury that they can afford for Perez to be some way behind on most days, as long as he's there or thereabouts. Well, today they didn't have that luxury, and it's really highlighted a problem that when the other teams, and Ferrari are coming, when the other teams like Ferrari and McLaren start getting getting closer and closer to Red Bull, and they will, then they need two drivers that have a reasonable level of performance to be able to deliver those points week in, week out.
Yes, there are definitely some question marks. Oh, as Ferrari celebrate behind me, there are some question marks surrounding Sergio Perez's performance, especially when Max Verstappen is out of the picture. Right, we're going to take a short break and then we will discuss McLaren's performance this weekend, because of course it was Lando Norris completing the podium. So it was Lando Norris who completed the podium for the Australian Grand Prix, and McLaren showing that their race pace is looking pretty good, and perhaps over the coming races they can take it to at least Ferrari, maybe not quite Red Bull. What did you make of Lando Norris's performance today, Harry, as Ferrari are really going for it with their celebrations and are quite rightly celebrating a 1-2 here in Melbourne? But what did you make of McLaren this weekend?
Yeah, I think they've got reasons to celebrate as well, not only for the podium, but Norris's pace, especially towards the end, on par, matching Leclerc in front of him, and was actually quicker than Sainz towards the end. So Norris was certainly quick and was able to be a challenger, but the gap was just a bit too big, and Niada was a bit slow at the start. Piastri was actually the quicker of the McLaren drivers at the start. But then we had the swap round ordered by McLaren, Piastri in front of Norris. Then that was swapped because Norris was quicker at that stage, to the misery of the fans, but I think the right call at the end of the day. But very impressive. I think McLaren will be very pleased with that performance, and sort of cements them as the third best team at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think things are looking up generally at McLaren. I think, they've got some stability in terms of Lando Norris has signed a longer-term contract. Even CEO Zak Brown signing an extension to his own deal this week. So they're putting things in place, and have been for some time now, to build an infrastructure and an organisation that looks set for the future. They're on a trajectory that's heading in the right direction, and today kind of just cements that and confirms it. I think there's still a little bit of work to do, because there are some inconsistencies in terms of their on-track performance at different circuits, but today was well executed. As you said, great race pace, and particularly when they had a couple of Red Bulls go missing, they were right there, right behind those Ferraris. Give it an extra 5 laps. Could Lando Norris have really challenged the Ferrari of Leclerc? I don't know, but it was very, very close, wasn't it?
Let's hear from Lando Norris. P3 for him today, and I think he's going to talk a little bit about how it's going to ebb and flow for them this year, with different circuits playing to their strengths and perhaps some showing up their weaknesses. Congratulations, Lando. Just talk me through your race, how satisfied you are to be on the podium.
Very. I think it's hard to never be satisfied if you're on the podium. So yeah, a good result for us, a third and a fourth, so I'm very happy with that. I don't think we're probably expecting to be so high. Of course, a little bit lucky with one of the Red Bulls not finishing. I'm sure they would have made our life a little bit tougher, but nevertheless, we were in a good position to fight against Ferrari. We were undercut, so maybe was there a second place on the cards? I think so, but it's always hard to make the right call and execute a perfect race when you're in those positions. So I'm so happy.
And what does this mean for the rest of the season? Are you feeling more confident with the package that you've got to be able to fight for potentially even wins this season? I
mean, from the start of the season, yes, but it's clear we're still a long way behind in certain places. Like turn 3, 4 here in the last sector, the slow speed corners, we're miles behind what a Ferrari can achieve. But we're one of the top guys and top teams in terms of high speed corners. So you win some and lose some, but for us, we know we just need to improve the slow speed, and once we do that, then we can be here a lot more often. For the time being, when we go to some slower speed circuits like the last few, we're probably not going to be in the same position, and we're going to struggle a bit more. So we'll be a little bit up and down still, because we've not managed to iron out some of our weaknesses just yet, but we're trying as hard as we can.
And it's a long season, so well done.
It's a long season.
Thank you. Lando Norris finished P3 ahead of his teammate Oscar Piastri. And Harry, you mentioned the switcheroo that the team instructed them to do. They were on different strategies, so you can understand McLaren's reasoning behind asking Oscar Piastri to move over for Lando Norris. But we got quite a lot of Australian fans here in Melbourne, funnily enough, and Oscar Piastri only grew up just down the road from Albert Park Circuit, so I did ask Zak Brown if he was worried about leaving the track later on, maybe a few boos from the Australian fans, but Oscar Piastri just really mature at the moment, so fantastic the way he's conducted himself thus far in Formula One, and his time will come, and again, just off the podium, P4 for him.
Yeah, good result for him, and I think he'll be understanding of that as well. As you say, his his maturity is something that really shines through at the moment, and is giving the Aussie home support something to smile about. He sort of also kind of put pay after the swap around. He had a bit of an off coming through the penultimate corner. The left-hander locked up and went onto the grass and had a little bit of time lost there, just sort of sorting himself out and getting back onto the track again, which kind of cemented him being behind his teammate for the remainder of the race, really, and resigned to that kind of strategy. So a little mistake there from Piastri on home ground, but outside of that, a nice weekend. Still a couple of tenths away in terms of race pace from Norris, though.
I think the one thing that McLaren might look at with hindsight and question perhaps is that what happened in the way those strategies plays out was they gave Oscar Piastri the undercut. That is the earlier pit stop in the first phase of the race, which put him onto fresher tyres, and actually that undercut catapulted him past Lando Norris, so gave him an early advantage. He wasn't really able to capitalise on that, and it was actually Lando who ended up being the quicker, so the team made that switch to put them back in the right positions with Lando in front of Oscar. I just wonder what might have happened had they given the undercut to Lando Norris earlier in the race. Could that have just given him enough early performance to close up on that Ferrari, and perhaps things might have been different? Of course, it's all ifs and buts now, but it's maybe one little question mark, and obviously it's easy with the benefit of hindsight. Could they have potentially overturned one of those Ferraris? Who knows?
Well, it was a good day for both the Ferraris, finishing P1 and P2. Good day for the McLarens, P3 and P4. A terrible day for Mercedes, nowhere to be seen. A double DNF for them. Lewis Hamilton with a PU failure, power unit failure, and George Russell ending the race on his side, not himself, but the car tipped up on one side after he'd made contact with the wall. Let's hear from Lewis Hamilton first, describing his experience this afternoon in Melbourne. Not great in terms of reliability for the Works team, the Mercedes AMG Petronas Formula One team.
Lewis, bad luck. I just wondered what this means for the rest of the season. It's such a long season with a PU failure at this point. I imagine you're envisaging some more difficulties towards the end of 2024.
Not really. It's you can tell it's going to be a difficult year. I mean, this is the worst first three races I've had since 2009, maybe. So, but it is what it is. I've had good years, and sometimes you have bad years. And so this has started out as a bad year. We'll work as hard as we can to make it a good one by the end.
We've all been saying it feels a bit like a roller coaster for you at the moment. After some sessions you're happy, some sessions you're sad, frustrated. How are you feeling in yourself about the car and the potential?
I mean, right this moment, I feel generally I'm fine. If I'm really honest, I'm just really trying to be present. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful still to be, I feel really privileged and grateful to be a driver still. It was awesome for the little bit of time that I was out there. I wish that I had the car to be able to fight and move forwards, but definitely not great when you go all this way and all that work that goes on and you don't finish the race, but these things happen, so we just have to look forward to Japan.
I have to say, guys, Lewis Hamilton wasn't as devastated as I thought he might have been coming into the media pen, but it has been a bit of a roller coaster ride this weekend for him. One session he's happy with it, next session he's not. He's making changes, the team are making changes, he's not happy with them, George Russell is. Where do you see this season going for him? I know he's going to Ferrari for 2025,
yeah,
but
that's
it
where
feels
it's going.
like, yeah, exactly. And I think today we've been looking at that timesheet thinking, I wish I was wearing red right now. But it's a bit unknown, isn't it, all the time? You just don't really know what's going to come out of Lewis Hamilton's mouth and what's going to happen when he goes out on track in that car.
They, and Hamilton in particular, it seems, in comparison to Russell, it's just lost at sea almost. They seem optimistic that there is inherent pace inside this car, but right now the biggest issues are the car's performance in high-speed corners, and Albert Park has quite a few of them, so they were bracing for a tough weekend, but that trend will continue unless they fundamentally sort out the issues that are wrong with this car. And once again, looking bigger picture, it's another car that, yes, okay, publicly at least they're saying it's better than the last one, but is it? It's still another car that Mercedes have produced that is not complying with the way they want it to in this ground effect era of car. And then another issue is, well, this power unit went kaput. Well, that's going to be a worry for him and all the other Mercedes powered cars as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big blow. The power unit failure is a big blow. I mean, they'll investigate it, strip it and have a good look at it and find out the root cause of it to know whether it's an ongoing issue. But of course, all of the other Mercedes-powered runners finishing absolutely fine. So hopefully that was a one-off incident. The bigger problem is the sort of the inconsistencies that they're finding in this car. They're a little bit lost, as you said, Harry. They're lost with where to go with it. But isn't that exactly the same story we've been hearing over the last 2 years? They ditched their last concept, this sort of idea of going in a very different direction technically to most other teams. They abandoned that after 2 years of struggling with it because they were lost. They've now gone to what, at least on the face of it, looks like a more familiar concept, much more in line with everyone else, and they're lost. So this is a really difficult situation. Of course, if you're Lewis Hamilton, at least you've got an exit out of this. You know that there is a move to Ferrari coming at the end of this year, so maybe that might explain why he's sort of a little bit objective about all of this, how he's not kind of so despondent. This is not the future of his career hanging in the balance here with this Mercedes, like it is for George Russell and would have been if you'd asked him 2 years ago. This is a Lewis Hamilton that might be starting to resign to the fact that he's got to write this year off and he cannot wait to get those red overalls on. They can't come quickly enough.
And what do we make of that crash for George Russell? He was on his side. It was all sort of going okay for him before that. What's been going on? Because he and Fernando Alonso have had to go to the stewards.
Yeah, well, it seems some data has emerged suggesting Alonso off throttle, braking a bit too hard, downshifting, then accelerating again before turn 6. Russell, as a result, catches rapidly and has a huge shunt effectively in the dirty air, and there's some debate at the moment about whether Alonso, did he have an issue or was this some untoward tactic to keep Russell behind him in this battle for 6th place. On the radio, I believe Alonso then said there was some issues with the throttle and kind of alluding to it might have been a car issue. That is still with the stewards as of right now recording. We haven't had an update on that at the moment, but it certainly was a big shunt for George Russell, and it means Mercedes no points on the board for the first time in 62 races.
Wow. Yeah, that's
disappointing stuff.
So disappointing. I mean, actually, with that incident, I've just watched onboards, rearward-facing onboards from Fernando Alonso's car, comparing the lap in which the incident happened to an earlier, sort of much more normal lap. Definitely you can see that Alonso slows rapidly, much more rapidly than normal, heading into that corner. And the question that George Russell will have is, was that because there was a problem with the car, or was he sort of almost brake testing me? I think Fernando Alonso knew that the only real opportunity for George Russell to get past, remember we're in the closing laps here, opportunities were becoming thinner and thinner, was in one of these high-speed corners. That's exactly where they are. So was he doing something to destabilise George Russell? That'll be the question mark on the lips of the guy who ended up upside down at the end of this race. And the stewards are having to look at the data, which should in theory be very clear. Was this a car problem? Was this something that the driver did differently to other laps? And I guess the result of that will be known very, very soon.
Well, while Mercedes were unable to score any points today, there was good news for Yuki Tsunoda. He scored some points. Both Aston Martins did. Fernando Alonso finishing P6, although, as we've just mentioned, he's in the stewards at the moment, so we're not sure what the outcome will be of that. His teammate Lance Stroll finished P7. Yuki Tsunoda P8, ahead of the two Haas drivers, P9 and P10. Nico Hülkenberg heading Kevin Magnussen. So a double points finish for Haas, backing up that point they scored in Saudi Arabia. Hugely important for the team, guys.
Massively at a time where the bottom 5 teams are really fighting, if they can, for 10th place and 1 point up for grabs, and that's only if a driver retires from any of the top 5 teams. On this case, when you've got Hamilton out, Verstappen out and George Russell, points mean big prizes. And Yuki Tsunoda, first of all, fantastic drive, quiet drive. We didn't actually see or hear much from the Japanese driver, ending in 8th position, massive points, and that has a big effect as well about the future of where he may lie in the Red Bull roller coaster that is their driver program, and also knock-on effects to his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, who could only manage 12th after a bit of a miserable weekend on home soil. And the two Haas cars playing the team game once again as well on differing strategies. They swapped the cars around and were basically fighting with the sole remaining Williams of Alex Albon, who they were desperate to get that final point, but in the end it went Haas's way. And for a team that were downplaying their chances in pre-season, to have 2 cars in the points and back-to-back points for Nico Hülkenberg is more than I'm sure they would have bargained for. It's fantastic from them.
How much were they celebrating last time out with that one solitary point? Now they've got both cars in there. That is fantastic. Just to quickly pick up on the Tsunoda thing, we've already spoken about how Perez just simply wasn't good enough this weekend, and does it highlight an even bigger problem for Red Bull? Is Tsunoda the answer to that? I mean, I don't know the answer to that particular question, but what he's doing with results like this is very much putting himself in that picture and in that conversation, which is all he can do at this stage.
So it was the Haas drivers that rounded out the top 10, and Alex Albon, and the only Williams on the grid, was unable to score any points for them this afternoon. And guys, that would have been redemption, wouldn't it? Because the story has been, quite frankly, bizarre. Alex Albon crashing in FP1, the Williams team unable to salvage his chassis, then taking Logan Sargent's chassis, giving it to Alex Albon. Logan Sargent then not able to complete the race weekend, and Alex Albon continuing on. I mean, it's been a weird one, but such a shame that Alex wasn't able to bring home a point for the team to make it all worthwhile. Yeah,
that would have been a real just reward. But you know what? I think Williams are very much justified in this decision of standing down Logan Sargent. They needed a car. If they're only down to one, they needed the driver who was going to be able to give them the best possible chance at scoring points. And Albon was embroiled in a really great battle with, at first, Hülkenberg and then Magnussen. Wheel-to-wheel stuff, scrapping away. Ultimately, it went to the 2 Haas cars, but I can't see Sargent have been able to perform like that. And I think that's what it ultimately came down to.
And behind Alex Albon was Daniel Ricciardo. We've spoken about the great performance from his teammate Yuki Tsunoda, finishing up in 8th. A really difficult weekend for Daniel Ricciardo, losing his time in qualifying yesterday. He finished P12 ahead of Pierre Gasly, P13, picking up penalties for running over the pit exit line. Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu finishing 14th and 15th. And it looks like Sauber are still struggling with those wheel nuts, guys. That's a problem that you just do not want to have in the back of your mind when you really need to be focusing on performance out on track.
Yeah, it sort of seems like a really basic one. I mean, nothing in Formula One is basic, but it seems like with such a well-drilled outfit as a Formula One pit crew, they're still having problems. I think it's to do with technology, it's to do with the design of some of these components. So there is a kind of lead time in redesigning and remanufacturing some of these things. They know what they need to fix and they will get on top of it, but at the moment it's really hampering them.
And the final car to finish was Esteban Ocon, the second Alpine, P16. And then, as you know, it was George Russell who didn't finish. Lewis Hamilton also unable to take the checkered flag with a PU failure. And Max Verstappen also out of the Grand Prix. And he has actually just walked past me out of the paddock. He's obviously making an early departure. And I think most people are starting to head home. It's been quite an eventful weekend, hasn't it, guys?
Yeah, it certainly has, but I don't think the events are going to now dissipate, particularly around this Alonso and Russell investigation. Apparently they were called to the stewards over this possible braking a little bit too hard for turn 6 when it comes to Alonso fighting for that position with George Russell.
They were called over an hour ago.
Yeah, they were in there for an hour. So something's going on there. And I think, Mark, we've been chatting as well, that there's a bigger issue outside of this in terms of should they have red flagged this race with the way Russell was kind of speared in the middle of the track. And on the radio, petrified.
The onboard radio from George Russell, when his car finally comes to a halt, he's on his side, but he's across the middle of the racetrack. And George Russell is screaming for the stewards and the FIA, that the race controllers, to red flag this race. We've seen some horrific incidents in the past where a car that's come to rest after a collision is then collided into by another car. You've got to red flag the race. I called it in commentary immediately at the time because it's my first reaction. I'm really disappointed this hasn't happened. What we did get was a virtual safety car, and you can say, well, that neutralises the race, and it does to some extent, but what happens is you're still in a race conditions under virtual safety car. There's a competitive element to it. If you've got to slow down to veer your way round a car in the middle of the racetrack, in the back of your mind as a driver, you've still got this idea that you might be losing some ground to the cars around you if you're having to go off into the grass to avoid the wreckage. You need to neutralise the race by red flagging it and make sure sure safety is absolutely paramount, and I think the question marks around this will be going on for some time, and rightly so they should. We've got to learn from any incident that happens in Formula One. I don't want to be too critical because I know these are difficult decisions to make at the time, but this is the end of a Grand Prix. We're a lap from the finish. Are the stewards, are the FIA looking at keeping the show alive towards the end of this race to get us to a checkered flag over and above safety? I don't know the answer to that. I don't want to cast aspersions, but that is going to be the question that's going to be asked all across Formula One, and rightly so it should be.
Yeah, well, hopefully we will find out the outcome of that investigation shortly. But this is bringing us to the end of the Checkered Flag podcast, Down Under. Have you enjoyed the race weekend, though, as a whole, guys?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It from the start, it has challenged every driver up and down this field, and the storylines coming into this weekend and leaving it are poising us for some great debate going into Japan. We've got a week off and then we're back again. I'm looking forward to it.
Best weekend of the 3 we've had so far, Rosanna. Absolutely loved
Definitely.
it.
I was going to say so. Japan's got to go some way to beat it, but it is such an iconic track. Who do you think might go well there? We've got to put Max Verstappen back into the frame, surely.
Yeah, usual service resumed. I don't know, Sainz riding off a wave of confidence.
It's going to boost the Ferrari team, isn't it? But this is the first really traditional racetrack in Suzuka. It's an iconic place, amazing, one of the best we've got in Formula One. The drivers love going there. Whatever the outcome, I can't wait for Formula One to descend back into Japan.
Is it cherry blossom season?
Oh, it is.
It is, because it's not normally when we've done it in the past, is it? You sort of miss it. So, we've got that to look forward to at least.
Oh, my goodness. The flora and fauna will keep you entertained, Harry Benjamin. Mark Priestley and Harry Benjamin, thank you so much for analysing the Australian Grand Prix with me. Plenty more to come this season. We've only done 3 races. There's a lot more to go. Thank you for listening to your Checkered Flag podcast. We will talk to you next in the lead up to Japan. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.